are all interconnected. And in 1998, the International Criminal Court was established. The legal and judicial barriers between the nation-states fell at that time. Let me just make a couple comments here. I was at the birthing of the International Criminal Court in Rome. It was, in my opinion, pretty chilling, pretty scary. The fact that it was held in Rome I thought was very interesting because not since the Holy Roman Empire has an international entity been allowed to transcend sovereign countries to arrest an alleged international criminal. As a result of September 11th, I did a fair amount of research, and I was shocked to understand, as I did my research, that since all the other barriers had fallen, if we were going to have a world that is interconnected, then you must tear down the military and the intelligence barriers. And that is what happened as a result of 9/11. So, we went from a world with barriers to a world without barriers, integrated, interdependent. These are words that are used constantly and continuously at all of the meetings that I attend. We are one world. So what does this really mean? Another set of laws now prevail. What are they? They're international law. You see, when you set in place an international structure, you have to have a new set of law. And international law dictates the behavior between countries. With that, let's take a look at the United Nations only for a moment. The United Nations has a head of state, Secretary General. It has a governing body, the General Assembly. It has a currency, its own currency called the Special Drawing Right. It has a treasury and its own financial system called the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It has its own military and police force. And in the last couple of years, they have been given the right to have their own military and police force. This is not something that they've always had. And within the last 6 months, they have started to raise monies through global taxation. At one of the meetings that I was at, the G8 meeting in last year in Scotland, where Jacques Chirac announced, as he had done 6 months previous, that the world needed a global tax or a tax for the poor, I asked Mr. Chirac, because they were talking about a tax on airline tickets, if that went well, did they see other international taxes? And he said to me, we have many more planned. When we take a look at the United Nations, there is a meeting every 5 years of the heads of state. That is called a summit. When the heads of state aren't meeting yearly, the General Assembly is meeting through ambassadors that are appointed government. I want you to see something else, and it took a while for me to piece this together because this was also foreign to me as I was studying the international level and as I was learning and as I was researching. The World Trade Organization, when they meet, all the trade representatives from all the countries of the world are meeting. It is a parliament of trade representatives. When the IMF World Bank meets, all the treasury secretaries from around the world are meeting. It is a parliament of treasury secretaries. Each of these meetings has their own document, their own plan of action, their own rules that these secretary treasuries and trade representatives ad nauseum take back to their own countries and implement. When we talk about food, all the secretaries of agriculture are meeting. International labor, the Secretary of Labor. The Security Council only has 5 members, 5 permanent members, but the secretaries of state meet there. Again, these are parliaments. And Habitat, that means where you live. The Secretary of Health and Human Services. You can go on to education and some of the other areas, transportation, you get the idea. And what do you have here? When you look at this, all of this corresponds to the cabinet that we have here in the United States. When we take a look at the United Nations, Let's take a look at what the United States Constitution gives. Our rights come from God. They are inalienable. They cannot be taken away for what you say or your behavior. We have, supposedly and hopefully, a Republican form of government, property rights, individual liberty, and, if you believe it today, limited government. The United Nations Charter, the rights come not from God but government. They are limited in number. They can be taken away for what you say or what you do. They have a charter form, a feudalistic form for the greater good and common rights, or common good. Now, if you're not familiar with this, the UN Charter is based on the Russian Constitution. Now, which one will you be supporting when you vote in your legislature? When we take a look at the structure now that has been set in place, there is the global level, the federal level, and the state level. So let's take a closer look at what this means and how it's changing. You cannot go from the global to the state or the local. You cannot without the federal level giving their consent, which they have done. So let's take, oops, wrong button. When we take a look at Agenda 21, we now see that the federal level is saying to the state level, yes to smart growth, yes to sustainable development, yes to eminent domain, yes to privatization, and yes to public-private partnerships. These are the things that your state legislators will be dealing with. Now let's take a look at what is beneath the state, the city, the county, and the township. And what you're seeing through regional government is that it's multi-jurisdictional rule. The state, the county, the city, the township is starting to merge. And you see that there. So what happens? Eventually there's only two levels, the global and the federal, with the regional government. What is this really? It's a devolution of government. And that's happening globally, by the way. I have people from around the world who contact me, whether they are in Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, England. It's happening all over. Really, the bottom line is no representative government. In France, they would call this tyranny. When did America adopt regional government, the devolution of government? Well, the New York Times in April of 1935 had an article, and they said that there was a plan that envisioned the merger of the states into 9 departments, transferring the taxing authority to federal agencies, the termination of states' rights, and the abolishing the Constitution. Local, state, and federal elected officials would be replaced by appointed professionals. Is that not what you're hearing? We need professionals to rule us? What are the steps to regionalism? In 1969, Nixon merged the 50 states into 10 federal regions through Executive Order 11647. That was followed up by Carter, who created FEMA as the enforcement arm of the regional officials with Executive Order 12148. In 1998, Executive Order 13083, the federalism order came down, if you're familiar with that. It redefines, because this is right on with regional government, it redefines the word state so that it includes all levels. It delineates between the Constitution and federalism. It changes sovereign powers granted to states so federal agencies have control over states. It allows the president to declare national emergency, which gives FEMA power to the federal, state, and local levels of government with total control over communications, power, and food. A year ago, I spoke in Alabama on regional government. It was very interesting. When you take a look at the Alabama Constitution of 1901, let's see what it said. We, the people of the state of Alabama, in order to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish the following constitution and form of government for the state of Alabama. Now let's see what they have under regional government. The Alabama Association of Regional Councils, ARC, is a public organization encompassing a multi-jurisdictional regional community. It's founded and sustained directly and tied to local governments. It is a non-profit organization. Do we call that government? The formation of the regional councils in Alabama has its basis in state law. Doesn't come from God like the earlier one. The earliest authorization for formation of a regional planning council was enacted by the Alabama State Legislature in 1935. This goes back to Roosevelt. So little by little, step by step, they have been building. So let's take a look at Agenda 21. What is it? As we look at the fact that it's a loss of the value of life, and that is tied to eminent domain. Sustainable development says there are too many people on the planet and we must reduce the population. The Earth's resources must be conserved and preserved. And lastly, the United Nations is the only global organization in a position to do this. So let's take a look at too many people. How are they going to reduce the people? Are any of you familiar with this? Absolutely. Dr. Jacqueline Kaysen from Humboldt University said in her fabulous book that if we were to put all the people of the world into the state of Texas, each one would have 1,200 square feet of living space. That's good math, in my opinion. So will you put into place laws that are based on a lie? So sustainable development was adopted by most countries worldwide, including the United States. It was supported by the Group of 8, the Group of 20, and other major political groups. It was supported by transnational corporations worldwide. It is an organizing principle for the United Nations. And what do they say? The soul has no value. That's the bottom line. The soul has no value. Man is responsible for the pollution of the planet, and we are subordinate to the earth and all other living creatures. This is the perversion of constitutional principles. We are not talking fun here, but we are talking reality. I was doing some research back in 1995, and I found this phrase in one of the UN documents, family dependency ratio. And as I read through this pretty Orwellian document, it never defined it, but it gave me enough information that I came to my own conclusion. And so I posed this to Maurice Strong.